All right, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Let's let other people come in. Really? There's only Rios here?
For now. Seems like it.
Where's everybody? I did put the link up. There's Hussein.
I was able to get in.
Hassan. Jeff. Anybody else? That's it for now. Okay. Maybe other people will show up as we're reading, as usual. So here we are, session number 14. Let's talk about the soulness of the soul, or how being is the house of language, as I put it. This is an interesting but a difficult argument because he's right off the bat eliminating any other possibility of how to analyze this issue except on the premise of the primacy of being itself and its modulations and gradations, intensity, lack thereof, etc. So that is what we have to bear in mind when he's talking about the soulness of the soul. So let's just read it and then we'll discuss it. All right, number 7, principle concerning the soul's relation to the soul. The soulhood of the soul, or the soulness of the soul, is not a relation accidentally occurring to its being, as the commonality of the philosophers claimed in likening its relation to the body to that of a ruler to his city, or of a captain to his ship. No, the soulhood of the soul is nothing but its mode of being, not like the relation of ruler, captain, father, or anything else that is its own proper essence and only falls into relation with something else after already being in that essence. For one cannot conceive of the soul's having being so long as it is soul and not pure intellect, except for a being such that it is in connection with the body and utilizing the bodily powers, unless it become transformed in its being and intensified in its substantialization to such a degree that it becomes independent in its own essence and able to dispense with its condition to the physical body. Then he shall return to his people rejoicing, or he shall be burned in a blazing fire. Verily, there's a message in this for people who worship their Lord. Now, I should actually say something here because one thing that I find extremely interesting in the way that Mulla Sadra glosses this issue, very thorny issue, and he was severely attacked for it by some of the peripatetics of his time, is that I find it quite interesting that what Mulla Sadra says about the soul is very analogous to what Heidegger talks about Dasein, the being there, right? A condition of unforgetfulness about the fact that one has being. So in this respect, we can give Heidegger his kudos, except that with Heidegger, he's really talking about the social being. He's not talking about a temporal reality as such. So number 8, principle concerning the pre-existence of the soul. He says the Adamic soul as a form of existence preceding the body, without this entailing the transmigration of souls, tanosok, and without necessitating the pre-eternity of the individual soul, which is the well-known view of Plato. It's not exactly the classical view of Plato, but as Plato was represented in the Islamic world, this kind of view became attached to Plato's conception of the pre-existence of the soul. In its coming into the world and then remembering, etc., etc. The whole argument of anamnesis is kind of revolves around this, but it's not quite what that Mulla Sadra is saying here. This mode of pre-existence does not require a multiplicity of individuals of a single species or their differentiation without reference to any matter or material preparedness. Nor does it entail the souls being divided after having been one in a manner of continuous quantities. Nor does it presume the soul's inactivity before being connected with bodies. Rather, Soul's pre-existence is, as we have indicated and explained in our commentary on the Hikmat al-Ishraq, Sohrawardi's philosophy of illumination, in a way that cannot be surpassed, so that here we shall offer only scriptural allusions. It is to this noetic pre-existence of soul that is saying, may he be exalted, refers, and when your Lord took out from the loins of the children of Adam their descendants and caused them to bear witness against themselves, saying, am I not your Lord? Alastu birabbikum. They said, indeed you are. Bala shahadna. Similarly, when the prophetic tradition, the spirits of men are armies drawn up in ranks, those who recognize one another are in harmony, and those who dislike one another are in disagreement. I love this idea. And likewise, this saying from Abu Abdullah, the Shaykh Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, upon him be peace, God created us from the light of his majesty and grandeur. Then he fashioned our created form from clay concealed underneath the divine throne and caused the light to dwell therein. So we were all men of light, and he created our party, our Shia, from our clay. And the following statement of Abu Abdullah is related to Muhammad ibn Babawayh. May God have mercy on him in his Kitab al-Tawheed, the book of divine unity. God, may he be exalted and glorified, created the truly faithful from the clay of the gardens of paradise and caused the spirit to flow into them. And from Abu Jafar, the Shaykh Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, he related something similar. God created the truly faithful from the clay of the gardens and poured into their forms the breeze of the gardens. From Abu Abdullah, it is also related, the truly faithful are brothers, since their spirits are from the Spirit of God. May he be exalted and glorified. Indeed, the spirit of the truly faithful person is more intensely connected to the Spirit of God than the connection of the sun with its rays. And this is a very subtle and important point that just now clarifies everything he said. The traditions handed down on this subject by our fellow Shiites are so innumerable that it is as though the existence of the spirits prior to their brothers were one of the essential premises of the Imamite Shiite school. May God's good pleasure be with them. Now, what he is saying that we got to bear in mind is controversial, because he is immediately denuding a soul of any kind of definite individuation in its fitra. So what then it becomes of the fitra? What becomes of this primordial beingness of somebody? Well, Mulla Sadra is appearing to say that this is being itself, that a soul is basically an articulation of the wujud mutlaq, in a specific tenuity of its appearance and manifestation. Now, we got to be careful, because when we assert something like that, it immediately kind of, makes it becomes a little bit unnuanced then in understanding this modulation and gradation in being itself. But essentially, this is what Mulla Sadra is sort of claiming here, and also in the Asfar and in some of his other works about the nature of the soul. So there we can then eliminate things like transmigration and reincarnation, etc., while also, subscribing to a sort of archetype about how symbolically we can accept, a sort of reoccurrence without, falling into the trap of positing or projecting substance to this reoccurrence as being an individuated substance that keeps returning again and again. So this is what basically this argument is saying. Anyway, I hand it now to whoever wants to say anything, talk about whatever they want in relation to this. Just jump in whenever you feel like it, whenever you're ready. It is a bit to digest. I do accept that, but it is a very subtle argument, and not without its problems in some respect. But it is a interesting subtle argument in and of itself. So Mulla Sadra is not really even differentiating being, even in its primacy, from everything else that emerges from it. so that everything else that emerges from it, from these subtle realms, is basically a modulation of it, ultimately, including the soul.
Some shake. So my question is, maybe you mentioned you like that hadith a lot. Could you just articulate what you like so much about it and expand a bit?
Sure. Let me just turn this air conditioning up here. Um, this hadith gets cited a lot in a lot of the Shiite corpus because then it sort of justifies this argument that we find in Shiite hadith about the Junud al-Aql wa Junud al-Jah, the legions of the higher intelligence or nexal consciousness, and the army, their adversaries, their legions of the acosmic ignorance, the war of the high, the hieratic or sacred war between the forces of light and darkness that traverses all time, such that it I mean, from a wahdati wujudi kind of perspective, there's a problem with this if you take it literally, but from a symbolic point of view, it then sort of kind of explains from a theological angle, the existence of the faithful and the unfaithful, the mu'minun and the kafirun, or even from the esoteric Shiite angle, the khawas, the initiates or elect, and the awam, the generality and the commonality of people.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
So here where he's using the term Shiite, obviously he's not referring to just any ordinary Shiites. He's referring to, Gnostics, at a high station Gnostic, obviously, because from my point of view, like I've grown up, I've always heard the term Sunni and Shia, and for me, it's almost like, just two different branches of Islam and equally like exoteric. So like,
Oh yeah.
so here, yeah. So I love
Look,
how
here, go back to the concluding testament that we began the course with, right? What he says about the fuqaha, the exoteric jurisconsults and their way. And he just condemns them as devils and misleaders, right? So when he's talking about Shias, he's obvious that's already presupposed, so that we're not talking about these institutional seminarian, exotericists. What he means by Shiites are those who follow the integral Gnostic path of the Imams. That's what he's
right.
that's what he's talking about. Yeah.
Okay. And I just wanted to point out, I love the clay, that specific clay. So at first, when I saw the word clay, of course, I took it in a more general context, but the more you read on, the more specific that particular clay is that he's talking about, which is very interesting.
Well, you find this in Ibn Arabi, but you also especially find it in a lot of these Shiite variants, and also very pronounced in the Shaykhi cosmology, where every realm has its own earth, right? And obviously the earth of that world is its clay. So in certain glosses on such hadith like this by the Shaykhi school, they talk about the clay of the world of Lahut, the clay of the world of the divinity itself, through which is there are like different levels of the world of the covenant. And the first of them occurs what they say the world of the Kitab, the world of the mother of the book, which is synonymous with Lahut, the world of the divine realm. And it is from this higher realm, whose earth, in some of the Shaykhi glosses, is actually the reality of Fatima. So the earth of the divine realm is the metaphysical reality of Fatima herself. Then you have these hadith where the truly faithful or the real Gnostics are actually leavens from the clay of that world of the Lahut, whereas everybody else is at lower levels of it, lower realms altogether. Yeah.
Right. I particularly enjoyed these two sections for some reason. I don't know why. I really enjoyed them. I don't actually have any questions, but I just wanted to say that they're great. This is getting better and better as it goes
Oh
on,
yeah.
obviously.
Oh,
And I had no idea. Like before we started this course, I didn't even know Mulla Sadra existed. Like I wasn't familiar with the personality. And like for me, like the extent of my knowledge in this Islamic milieu is like Suhrawardi was the king as far as I knew. And now like I see that there's levels and levels above that
yeah.
even. And like is this the epitome in Islamic and mysticism? Well, maybe mysticism's not exactly the
In
best
a
word there, but
in a particular trajectory of it, yeah, this is just a very, preliminary synopsis of everything. I mean, if you delve into his actual magnum opus, the Four Journey of the Soul, which in its current edition is about 12, 13 volumes, um, it gets the density is there, but also the profundity at the same time is something to behold. I mean, Mullah Sadra is um, what he accomplished by synthesizing and clarifying and basically pruning a lot of the problems that of everything that had preceded him was just pure genius what he accomplished. Not
Mhm.
without its controversies. Obviously, when a project such as this, there's always bound
Yeah,
to be people who are going to disagree with you, are going to fight and try to poke holes in your argument.
yeah,
But I would say that inside the Shiite world specifically, since Mullah Sadra's death, much of theology and let alone philosophy, but theology is in many ways a footnote to Mullah Sadra itself. Even
right.
those theological schools that are opposed to Mullah Sadra's primacy of being and his, etc., are forced, in some way to give Mullah Sadra his due, either in refuting him or consenting to what he's saying or whatever it is. Um, so Mullah Sadra is truly the king of philosophers. I mean, of Gnostics, that crown, in my opinion, belongs to Ibn Arabic. But amongst the
Mhm.
philosophers, um, Mullah Sadra is the king. Suhrawardi's
Yeah.
up there. I mean, I don't take a single thing away from Shahabuddin Suhrawardi at all. But what Mullah Sadra accomplished is really, quantum levels beyond this because he's also dealing with Suhrawardi very carefully and clarifying and reformulating
Yeah,
and criticizing and synthesizing and it's great,
yeah.
And what's especially interesting to note about Mullah Sadra is that Mullah Sadra waited a long time for his thoughts to really, really mature before he really started to write this stuff. So, like this particular book was written in his 60s. His magnum opus, the Asfar, was written in his late 50s. So he was
Okay.
already, in the twilight of his years,
Mhm.
before he, really put everything just boom, put everything in there, which is a quite an interesting thing itself because Sohrawardi was very young. He was only in his 30s,
Uh,
when he wrote his Hikmet al-Ishraq and when they
that
finally,
makes a lot of
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense somehow. For some reason, I don't know why, but that just intuitively seems to make a lot of sense that a 50s-ish, 60s-ish year old man would be able to take a 30s-ish year old man's, work and assimilate it completely and then develop it even beyond what it was before. And that's what I'm sensing from Mullah Sadra is
yeah,
like he's like Surarity plus plus
yeah,
plus
yeah. Oh yeah.
in
Oh,
a and
absolutely.
you can tell he's a fan, obviously, of
Oh,
Suhrawardi himself,
love.
and Ibn Arabi, and I'm starting to see that Ibn Arabi and Mullah Sadra kind of go together like a
Yes.
set.
Yeah, they do. And this is what also drove the ire of a lot of his contemporaries, including some of the philosophers. Because Ibn Arabi, even though he's a very weird saint, was after all a Sunni, and so in that kind of an environment, um, your pedigree, your sectarian pedigree is, it means your street credibility or lack thereof is dependent on it amongst people like that. And for Mullah Sadra to just be, just be loving every letter of Ibn Arabi, just drove these people nuts, you know. So,
He was a Sunni, did you say?
even Arabic. Although
Okay.
that's, in my opinion, from previous conversation, I think that is up for debate. But
Yeah. Okay.
uh, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you.
sure. Anybody else? Hussein,
Sidi,
Hassan?
I will start with
Sure,
a
go.
series of questions. First of them, within the framework of Mulla Sadra,
Mhm.
what's the the main conceptual difference between the definition of soul and the definition of pure intellect?
Very good question. Very. Um, the definition between the soul and pure intellect. Number one, the intellect, al-aql, has its locus, primary locus, in the world of Jabarut, right? It is active. Um, this is the realm of the archangelic active intellects in the way that Mulla Sadra frames it in Asfar. And its reality, the reality of the intellect with a capital I, is pure abstraction in comparison to realms below it. Whereas the soul's locus of becoming is the realm of Malakut. It's the angelic realm, right? And so it is closer to the world of matter than the intellect is to the world of matter, to the Nasut. So the definition of the spirit is a universal reality, right? Sometimes, for example, we have um, theological glosses about the ruh that is mentioned in the Quran as being another name for the archangel Gabriel. You can take it that way. But in other hadith literature, we have ruh being glossed as kind of an independent ontological being separate from any of the archangels. We have that as well. Whatever it is, and ultimately a lot of these registers and symbols sometimes are either synonymous or can flow in and out of each other. But the soul, the nafs, as the word is used in Arabic, is more of a passive and becoming reality, whereas the spirit is part of that action, already always activity of the divine fiat itself. It is as if the spirit, the intellect, is the individuation of the amr itself, if we're going to talk about the ruh in any kind of a technical sense. Whereas the nafs is the more passive, it's the maf'ul in relation to that. And like I said, it's closer to the world of matter because its originating locus in this kind of cosmology is in the world of the angels, is in the world of Malakut. But this obviously complicates somewhat what Mullah Sadra just said to us here, because he's also asserting that the souls of the faithful have their locus of origination in the higher world. That is true, but then you have to kind of talk about here, you have to contextualize the hadith that he brought in at the end. Sorry about that. Happened again. I didn't mention any Z words or anything, but seems that someone doesn't care. But anyway, as I was saying, so you have to contextualize this from that angle, that in a primary definition that we gave, the spirit is synonymous with intellect. Intellect occurs in the realm of Jabarut. It is a hypostasis in its own right, whereas the nafs is sort of an occurrence, a nasha, an origination within the world of the malakut. It's an angelic world that then, descends into the material world of matter and individuates through it, according to Mulla Sadra. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but I want to gloss it a little bit more.
Okay.
So when here Mullah Sadr criticizes the understanding of earlier philosophers that the nafs in itself, it is something which is independent, and correlation between the nafs and the body, the soul and the body, it is accidental already. But Mulla Sadra is saying, no, it is not the case. The connection between the soul and the body, it is essential connection because we cannot conceptualize the souls without its relation to the body.
Yes. All right. Let's unpack this. I said before that Mulla Sadra's definition of soul is tied to his definition of being and the primacy of being itself. So if we want to analogize this relationship of the soul to the body, which he's saying is a very arbitrary distinction that the philosophers are making, we have to look at then the soul from that position of the gradation and modulation, the tashkik al-wujud itself, right? In this sense, we don't separate nafs from wujud. We don't separate nafs from jism and jasad either, from the astral body and the somatic frame. So what Mulla Sadra is therefore saying here is that the soul is the beingness of the body, of the jism and the jasad, of the astral body and the somatic frame of every individual. It is the wujudiyah of the mawjud, if you would, is the soul, is the nafs.
Okay, so we can say that with the framework of Tashkikul Wujud, that all of them, the intellect and the soul and the body, they are different manifestations of the essentially the same reality.
Yes.
But on the and one said that in some way it would be similar to the what Sheikh Suhrawardi is in Hayakil Nur, that it is the same conception that all of them, they are the different manifestations of light.
Yes.
Okay. Now the next question, it is here related to Sheikh Suhrawardi. If we take that his understanding of soul and pure intellect is more close to the classical Islamic philosophers than this one to Mulla Sadra, that we have the same hierarchy: body, soul, pure intellect, and so on. One of the things which I cannot comprehend is the following thing. The souls of the celestial bodies, they're obviously higher souls with much higher rank than the souls of the human beings.
Yeah.
But the souls of the celestial bodies, they would be their souls for eternity. But the human soul, although it is inferior to the souls of celestial body, it has the potentiality to become a pure intellect. And that is some kind of contradiction which I cannot resolve within his framework. Is my question clear?
No, your question is a very legitimate question. It is, and I've also thought about this myself a lot. Let's look at the implication of the argument first. The implication of the argument that Mulla Sadra is making here is that the spiritualized, right, possess a proclivity to that spiritualization that is embedded in the very pre-eternal archetype of themselves in the world of Lahut. So the clay, the celestial clay that the Imam is talking about. Whereas those who aren't, right, don't have that proclivity. But this is a bit of a predeterminist, this is a Ghadari kind of argument in some sense that elsewhere Mulla Sadra seems to dismiss. But basically, this is what he is saying, that a spiritualized individual or a person who has that proclivity in potentia, okay, has their being generated at a much proximate level of the universal being than those who don't. Hence, their how they end up being magnified back to that first principle within their material life. So this is a the soulness of their soul is the beingness of their being itself, which is a reflection or an aspect of the universal being, or the wujud mutlaq, the absolute being of the inclusive unity, the wahidiyah. Is that clarifying?
Yes, to some extent, it clarifies the question. The next one, when we refer to the quoted ayats and hadith, thus Mullah Sadra tries to hint the same thing, that the in analogical manner that we here in this physical material world have, let's say, soul-body relation, but this soul-body relation it represents the primordial soul-body connection which was before we were born, where the clay which is thought about, it's representing the body, and what is made to flow within this clay, the ruh, it is what is representing the soul we have at the moment. But as were said in one of the hadiths, both of them have a spiritual substance.
Yeah, Johara Rohania. One way to look at it is that the more inspirited a soul is, the more it inclines to that intellect, to the aql itself, the higher intelligence, next to consciousness. Whereas the less it inclined it is, right, it is leaning in the opposite direction to the jah. This is sort of what Mulla Sadra is trying to kind of lead us to, trying to comment and gloss a little bit on that, on those two hadiths of the aql wa jah. So then you go back to again to the whole beingness of the being, or the soulness of the soul. So it is the modulation, it is the inherent modulation of that soul, right, towards its spiritualization that represents its authentic individuation, that makes it real, or more soulular than someone else otherwise. Does that make any sense? Jeff, let's see, you got a smile on your face. Yeah, I know we're having to
It's just did you just coin a neologism
Yeah,
there?
I do this. I've been doing this quite a lot.
That's awesome. Like, yeah, what did you just say? Can you say that
Cellular.
again?
The
Solar.
yeah. Oh,
What a
crap.
great word. Okay, solar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard that before, so that's what I was laughing at. But the funny thing is, like, it makes sense. I think I know what you're saying, but the language is so deep that it's you're actually, yeah, you're coining new terms on the fly here, and it works beautifully.
I did actually use cellular in a couple of different places previously. Yeah. Because yeah, you need new language and neologisms to try to explain some of this stuff. It
Yeah.
doesn't work otherwise. Yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, Hassan, you were saying.
Because turning to the hadith, it's on one hand, how to formulate it? When for the classical Islamic philosophers, I mean the Avicenna and so on, before Mulla Sadra, they are let's say the argument. Okay, let's put it in this way, as independent questions. The argument, the argument, when where is the when is the beginning of the soul? Is the soul created simultaneously with the body, or or do the soul exist before the body? Now, when the philosopher
Okay, it's
says,
all right, all right.
just allow me to
Yeah,
add one more sentence,
sure.
because when philosophers, they answer that they are simultaneously, they are giving many arguments, but logical arguments, completely disregarding the ayat and ahadith.
Yeah.
But when the other group, which says the soul is before the body, they are doing the opposite. They are quoting many ayat and ahadith, but somehow uh, just do not pay almost any attention to the philosophical arguments for the opposite. How it is possible to combine the two, the logical arguments, the philosophical arguments, with the given text of the ayat and hadith.
Here's what Mullah Sadra is basically trying to say. He's saying that the way that the philosophers have even formulated this whole premise and argument is wrong. Why? Because they're trying to establish a priority posterity relationship to an individuation that, in the way that Mullah Sadra is articulating the primacy of being, is silly. Okay? So the priority of the soul in its cellularity, let me use that word again, is, on the one hand, it is related to the primacy of being itself. But if we want to look at it from the point of view of the descent of the worlds, the hypostasis of the realms, etc., then its origination, its nasha, is in the world of malakut. That is its clay. It's from that angelic world, right? But it is descending, for lack of a better way of putting it, because there's no ascent or descent ultimately from this perspective. It is descending into matter in order to perfect itself. So therefore, its individuation as individuation occurs through the body. And this is all the arguments leading up to this have been, hammering at us again and again and again, not to make this, this immaterial division on this question, until he then throws this here, and gives us that very important nuance as to why that distinction shouldn't be made. And once then this distinction between soul and body, spirit and matter is no longer made, then we can start to enter the frame of talking about its tenuity, its modulation, its strength or weakness, rather than it just fell out through the clouds into the world of matter, which is ultimately how all of these discussions have been framed in the past, including to some degree with Plato himself. I mean, his argument
So
about remembering anamnesis and how we know everything, and then once we come into the world, we forget it, is beautiful. But what Mulla Sadra is saying is that from the perspective of the primacy of being, all of the way that this has been framed is silly and contradictory.
So, what I get from all of this, that this problem, which is before the other and so on, it is artificial problem,
Yes.
which is created by the dualistic paradigm
Yes.
between the soul and body. Okay.
Bad.
And
Yeah.
the other thing that if we try to somehow harmonize the two opposite views, that when we say that the soul is before the body, it is prior in terms of hierarchy of being.
It's prior in terms, yeah, of the hierarchy of being,
And not in temporal terms.
no. Because once we start getting into discussion of the temporality, then the prior posterity thing becomes a little bit weird. Because like if we're saying that the solarity of the soul, the soulness of the soul is its very being, the very being and individuation of every individual person out there, that is their soul, right? Then this whole priority posterity, if the soul came from another world and then is trapped now in this material world, blah blah. This is one thing that Mulla Sadra is very delicately trying to move people away from thinking, even though with Sohrawardi we have the same idea that the body is the fall into this world of the Occident, and this whole tale of the Occidental exile is about this. But with Mulla Sadra, he's very delicately and very deliberately trying to lead us to the fact that while these things may be true on one level of symbolism and understanding, from this point of view of analyzing the soulness of the soul, the soulness of the soul is in fact in its malakut right now. I mean, this is the argument that he made last week, that we're perceiving and experiencing things in the reality of things are already located in another world, right? And that our material experience of them here is the accident, right? But nevertheless, from another point of view, the soul is experiencing all of this within the dunya. In its growth, its own transubstantiation, everything is occurring here. So there is no separation ultimately from its genesis to its present movement. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it clarifies the matter. Thank you very much, Sidi.
Hussein. Yeah.
These are just some thoughts that came up in these discussions that you guys are having. The one thing is the intellect is understood as being abstract and universal, whereas the imagination is it's concrete and particular, and the sensible is concrete and particular. And just a basic kind of confusion that I have about that in Mulla Sadra's system is that it seems that I thought that every wujud is the most concrete and the most individual thing, and so the intellect, because also you can put it in terms of the difference between aqal and dhihn, the intellect and the mind. The intellect is in Mulla Sadra it's not abstracting forms, it's apprehending something in wujud, whereas the dhihn is the one that's dealing with abstractions in the form of quiddities. So if we're saying that the aqal is abstract and universal, we would seem to have to, it would have to be in a different way than.
Well, the aqal in the universal sense, in its basic locus as being, the spirit in its universality. So Ruh Kulli is the Jabarut, right? Which is the realm of the abstract archangelic intellects, etc. And it itself is contemplating the realm of Lahut, right? Out of which everything flows into that world. And then it creates, these substrates that become, the world of the Malak, of the world, angelic world, and so on. We have this whole emanatory scale. When he posits the intellect as being the contemplator that is contemplating concreteness, but not concreteness in a material sense, but concreteness as actuality. Whereas the then is falling into this abstraction of division. He does, in fact, make that distinction in his Aspa, where he cites the hadith from Ali, that knowledge is a single thing, but the ignorant have multiplied, and attributing the knowledge of that single thing to the action of the intellect, and the multiplicity of the ignorant to the dhihn, even though it is, the dhihn is cogitating all kinds of abstractions of quiddities and concepts and logical formulas and etc. He does actually say this in the Aswan. So that's one way to take it. And he also asserts that the dhihn leans more to wahm than the aql, which is a clarifying argument. Wahm being a complete different thing, that's conjecture or just straight out delusion, whereas dhihn is usually just the activity of ratiocinating, if you need to.
Okay. So the reason that another way of looking at it, from the problem for me, is thinking about the aql as apprehending something individual, but also the sense of concreteness that this is. I guess the way that I was thinking of universal was,
let's drop the word concreteness. Let's use instead the word lucidity for aql. I think that's a better way of putting it than concreteness. So the aql, what you can attribute to the aql in its perception is lucidity. That's probably a better way of clarifying that. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm also thinking of just practical implications. This is kind of related to Suhrawardi. I was thinking about how in Suhrawardi you have these invocations to these individual souls and intelligences, and there's a sense of with that I get a really strong sense of concreteness, that there's an individual being here that I'm addressing. With Mulla Sadra, there's the sense that not just the abstractness, but also because it's all one, the wahdat al-wujud sort of perspective. There's something about the Suhrawardian way of looking at it that feels more satisfactory to me, where it makes more sense for me to address an individual, even how he will address a being and then tell that being to address its
Lord,
being that it's the talisman of, and then send this all the way up the hierarchy up to the Lord of Lords.
Yeah.
There's something about that seems, it's visionary. The visionary concreteness of it is really satisfying. To me.
I tend to agree. It's beautiful. I mean, it's aesthetically a lot more pleasing. But the argument that Mulla Sadra is making here also is quite to the point and on point regarding this. He wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that Suhrawardian perspective. And just after all, in one of the known manuscripts of the Al-Waradat wa Taqdisat that Qurban was actually using in his on Islam Iranian. This is the manuscript of Suhrawardi's prayers. Mulla Sadra had written all these kinds of glosses, and apparently his own personal manuscript of Suhrawardi's prayers to the planetary intelligences was much more extensive in its content than the manuscripts that we presently have in Turkey. So this is quite interesting. And in his commentary on Suhrawardi's Hikmat al-Ishraq, this all comes up, and he actually quotes and comments on these prayers, on individual elements, the prayer to Hurash, the prayer to the sun, etc., which is just magnificently beautiful, this thing. So Mulla Sadra inclined to that himself, but from the point of view of the primacy of being, this all then becomes basically a perspective that the Salik takes, rather than being the totality of the actual picture, if you will. Because, the gradations that Suhrawardi's hierarchy of intelligences insists upon rests fundamentally on his primacy of quiddity position. Whereas for Mulla Sadra, it's the very opposite of this, right? So rather than talking about hierarchy in the way that, just strict vertical hierarchy, horizontal one, with Mulla Sadra, this all becomes a modulation. So it's actually more correct to talk about Mulla Sadra in terms of holarchy rather than hierarchy, because of this incessant modulation of being. Right? Everything is just a, modulation of the single being itself. Yes, gradations, tashkik, and all of that sort of stuff occur within it, but it is the same, ultimately the same, rather than different. Whereas with the primacy of quiddity, even though with Suhrawardi, everything is from the substance of light, yet these various hierarchies of and whatnot, they assert a quiddital kind of proposition.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else want to say something? All right, if not, let's just leave it here for today and go on for next week to read propositions 9 and number 10. This starts to get even more interesting from this point onwards, I assure you. And we'll get back together again same time next week. Everybody have a good week. Until next week, ya Allah.